Our poet for this module is Wilfred Owen, who died a week before the war ended, but wound up as the most famous poet of the Great War. He only had 5 poems published before his death, but his poetry is now studied by all British students preparing for their school leaving and university entrance exams. Owen was a member of a Welsh family that had been solidly middle class until his grandfather wagered the family home in an ill-advised bet. Owen's father worked as a railroad station manager, a job that required education, but would not have been undertaken by a true gentleman who would have lived on income from property. Owen himself was a grammar school boy. He attended not one of the elite public schools like Eton, but a local state school that was set up for the clever boys of the working and lower middle class. Owen volunteered for the Army and was eventually offered a commission as second lieutenant in the Manchester Regiment. In 1917, he had a series of traumatic experiences in the war, including being buried alive, and suffered from shell shock. He was sent to Craiglockhart War Hospital, where he met Siegfried Sassoon. At the time Owen met Sassoon, he had been writing poetry for years, but, to be frank, it wasn't very good. He had mastered many technical aspects of poesy, but he thought poetry ought to be about light and beautiful things, so most of what he wrote was pretty vapid and forgettable. At Craiglockhart, Sassoon encouraged Owen to write about the war, the most intense and meaningful thing either of them had ever experienced. As Owen turned his poetic skills to his experiences in the war, he found his métier. We should notice that Owen began to write poetry in earnest only in the latter half of 1917. He was dead in early November 1918, so he had a little less than 18 months of productive time as a poet. During his lifetime, only 5 of his poems were published, and one of those appeared in the hospital magazine of Craiglockhart. Miners is Owen's first published poem, other than that poem published at Craiglockhart. It was published by The Nation, which was the most impressive place for an English poet to publish. The topic of the poem is a mining disaster that Owen read about in the newspaper, but of course he does much more than just talk about the mine tragedy. As you read this poem, ask yourself, what does Owen say about mining? Then, as you encounter the transition into talking about the war, soldiers instead of miners, think about what Owen does to make that transition. Owen is doing something interesting with rhyme in this poem as well. Let's quickly remind ourselves of what we know about rhyme. First, there is perfect rhyme. This is usually what we mean when we say rhyme. In perfect rhyme, the initial consonant is changed, but the sound of the rest of the word stays the same in the rhyming word. Second, there is I rhyme, where the words look alike but don't sound alike. Third, there is imperfect rhyme, where the ends of the words would be perfect rhyme except that the syllabic emphasis is different in the 2 words. If you look at my first example here, down is obviously stressed. It only has 1 syllable. But in uptown, the rhymed part of the word is actually unstressed. That's what makes it imperfect rhyme. Finally, there is something called slant rhyme or para-rhyme. This is the mode of rhyme Owen uses in Miners, and in fact, all of the examples here are drawn from the poem. You will notice that the consonants in the words all stay the same. What changes is the vowel, and it doesn't change by much. It moves over slightly to a related but not identical sound. Slant rhyme has the effect of discomforting the reader. We expect rhyme and get something that just isn't quite there. It makes us feel uneasy, as if something that we rely on to always work is broken, and we have to figure out another way around. Why do you think Owen uses slant rhyme in Miners? What effect does it have on readers, and how does that effect work with the meaning content of the poem to create an emotion or response in the reader? Would you say this poem is modern? What aspects of the poem make you feel this way? We could go to any of the Owen poems on our reading list this week and ask similar questions. What feeling does the poem give? How does the poet create this feeling? What technical strategies does he deploy to create the effects of the poem?